What is up, my friends? Unfortunately, it's getting cold, Jeff.
What? What do you mean, unfortunately? This is the best time of the year.
Socks suck, pants suck, jackets suck, right? But, you know, fishing is amazing. So even though it's too cold, we should all keep fishing through the winter. Jeff and I were talking about winter fishing, and we decided that it would be a fun episode to talk about 5 rods that you have to have in your winter fishing arsenal. We answer rod questions all the time, every day, and this was a real hard challenge to pick only 5 rods if I had to pick 5 for winter fishing. So I'm going to break down why we chose those 5, what they do. We'll talk about some winter fishing. So if you'd like to join in the conversation, hang out, talk about some rods and some cool winter baits, let's do it. Welcome to the Hookup Tackle. The Hookup Tackle is the world's largest showcase of Megabass products, featuring baits and colors not found at any other dealer. The Hookup also offers a wide display of OSP, Evergreen, Depths, Lucky Craft, Jackal, and many more. The Hookup Tackle is owned and operated by family, is staffed by guides and verified tackle nerds who love helping anglers elevate their craft. If you're in the Phoenix area, we'd love to have you stop by our showroom and check out the wonderful world of Megabass and the Hookup for yourself. If you shop online, there are almost 10,000 SKUs of Megabass products alone, with hundreds of other companies and new products being added daily. So next time you're looking for that hard-to-find bait, that color your fish have never seen before, or maybe you just want to elevate your game, look at thehookuptackle.com. All right, welcome back, my friends. I am Ben with the Hookup Tackle, the Tackle Otaku on Instagram, being joined by my buddy Jeffrey the King. Jeff, good morning to you, sir.
What's going on to you, man?
How are you?
You look bundled up.
Well, because it's freezing, dude. It just dropped below 70 out there. So I gotta wear a jacket. Yeah, I had a beanie on earlier, but my head started sweating a little bit.
Freezing.
Hey, look, everybody's winter is personal to them, okay? We get to choose where we live, most of us, right? So, yeah, now that that's derailed, I am Ben with the Hookup Tackle, obviously the biggest wuss when it comes to winter conditions. Right next to Griff. Yep, me and Griff are twins. So, we thought it would be fun to talk about winter fishing from the standpoint of rods, right? We talk about it a lot with like baits and that kind of stuff, but if we had to choose 5 rods that are like must-have rods for winter fishing, this is kind of how we would choose our arsenal. Now, keep in mind, we tried to just be like broad spectrum with this. So there are places like even here locally, if I go to one lake, I might do a couple things that I'm not going to talk about today, right? And if I go to that lake, they might even be different things than what this lake is going to be, right? So obviously, you know, you guys know where you are. There are certain bodies of water that are just going to lend themselves better to techniques that we're not going to talk about. But in general, when I think winter fishing and what I do almost every time I go out, these are 5 rods that are pretty much must-haves, whether I'm here in Arizona or I go next door to California or I travel back east. These are pretty much rods that have to be in the lineup. So, ready, Jeff?
Let's see what you got.
Let's jump in. So, for me, it's impossible to think winter fishing without thinking jig and jerkbait. Like those two things just scream winter for me. So I'm gonna start with jigs, okay? So we talk about jig fishing quite a lot. If you guys aren't fishing jigs, a jig is just a great way to get a little bit bigger bite than what you might be getting on other things. There are times when you can go out to the lake and just absolutely destroy them on jigs and catch 100 a day. But if you're a tournament fisherman or you're looking to just upgrade the class of fish that you're seeing, a jig is one of those baits that just gets you that next class bite. Big fish love them. Whatever it is about a jig, it's a magnet for big ones. And when I think about catching like a true, 13 plus pounder, right? there are very few baits that I think realistically could do it. A jig is definitely on that list of baits. So, we're talking about jig, we're talking about some kind of, lead head with a skirt, and then we're gonna put a trailer on it, right? So I grabbed 3 that I love. So hunch jig has become my kind of go-to. Of course, you can do something more of a mop style or like a depth headlock, so like a football type jig. Usually I'm gonna put just a craw trailer or some kind of double tail on here, and I'll use my trailer to make it bulkier, bigger, or smaller. But this time of the year in the winter, I'm a huge fan of like 5/8 and 3/4 ounce. So that's kind of where I live. I might even go up to 1 if I need something like super heavy. But a 3/4 ounce jig or a 5/8 ounce jig really lets me fish deeper water if those fish move out to 40, 50 feet. It also lets me kind of run bank when I know they've moved up shallow, and I can fish very fast and aggressively with something that just falls real fast and triggers a fish that may otherwise be sluggish because of the cold temps. So don't get stuck too much in a rut thinking of winter as you have to fish super, super slow. Sometimes you do, but sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes the fish are just super lethargic, and if you're fishing a bait real lethargic, they just watch it go by and they don't care. But, bass are always going to have instincts, so sometimes something just falling straight in front of them forces them to just instinctively get it before they even have time to think, and that's why a heavier bait sometimes can be a better option. So, with that said, gotta have a jig rod. So for me, the NRX 895 is my go-to jig rod. It's been my go-to jig rod since NRX has been a thing. I like the 895 because it's really designed for throwing that heavier jig. It's obviously a little bit more tip heavy. It's a little heavier overall than like an 894, like a Steve's Bottom Contact or something like that. But the 895 has so much power, and it's just as comfortable offshore fishing really deep as it is running bank and kind of pitching bank with a heavy jig. So it does both beautifully. Can't say enough good things about it. If you were to spec it out, it's 3/8 to 1 ounce, but you could definitely go way over an ounce. You could do a 3/4 ounce jig with a 1/2 ounce trailer, and there's still a lot of power left in this rod. So for me, my go-to #1 rod of the winter is going to be this guy, the 895 CJWR. Now, let me preface this video. I'm going to show alternatives to all of my choices, because we all know that I'm a little bit bougie when it comes to rods and reels, right? So I'm going to show you some alternatives to each of these. The biggest thing I want you to know is, obviously I'm going to talk about the specific models that I like. Really what I want to cover though is the type of rod that you're looking for, right? So when you're talking about throwing a big heavy jig, even a 1/2 ounce jig, by the time you put a trailer on it, that jig's going to weigh 5/8 or 3/4 of an ounce, right? So you really need a heavy powered rod. You really need a rod that's really fast at the tip, but you still want to have a little bit of give. You don't want this thing to be a broomstick. So you need to have just a little bit of tip to it, and then the rest of it be power. And that way, a lot of times with the jig, you're lifting it, and you're getting that jig to kind of bang around on rocks and maybe lift up and then fall, right? And you want to be able to feel that bite on that slack line, because most of the bites, if you're kind of lifting and falling, if you're pulling it up, letting it fall, right, and you're pulling it up and letting it fall, most of the bites are going to come as that bait falls. So I'm a bass, I'm cold, this jig is kind of lifting and falling, it falls right in front of my face, I just eat it, right? So it's really important that you feel that slack line thunk, right, so that you can wind down and set the hook. So look for a rod that's really fast. If you want the ultimate, that would be this guy, the NRX Plus 895 in my opinion. But if you don't want to spend 600 bucks on a jig rod, Expride by Shimano, they make an awesome alternative. So this is a 7.2 heavy, whereas that one was a 7.5, but it's still capable of throwing a lot of the same baits. It's got a very similar taper, even though it's shorter, but you have just that little bit of tip and then lots of power. So this would be a really good alternative in that $200 price range. If you're looking for something, again, a little less expensive, it's gonna be a little shorter, a little bit lighter. If I had to choose between the two, I'm going to NRX just because it's so amazing, but this could be a great alternative for your jig. So there you go. There's rod #1, a jig rod. All right, Jeff. Rod #2, got to go with the jerkbait rod. Now, jerkbait's not a bait that everybody can throw in the winter. Well, obviously a lot of people are going to be under ice in the winter. Sucks for you guys if that's the case. I feel for you. But if your lakes stay open and you get a chance to fish through the winter, a jerkbait can be an amazing way to get them, because a lot of times fish will just suspend in the winter. When it gets cold, the bait just kind of suspends and the fish just kind of move out and suspend. And so a lot of times fishing a jerkbait over the top of them and just letting it move and then just sit there and pause for long periods of time and quiver can be a great way to get strikes, especially for smallmouth. So let's talk about this. So jerkbaits that we throw this time of the year, Pointer 100, Evoluzion 110, Edo Shiner. It's a great time to go into some deeper diving stuff as well, like a +1, +2. One of the best ways to tackle this is in the Megabass jerkbait line. I'm a huge fan of Megabass rods for jerkbaits. They build the rods specifically for jerkbaits. Of course, there's rods like the Expride 610 and, you know, rods like that. Steez makes a nice one. So there are alternatives to the market, but I just keep going back. No matter which rod I pick up, I keep going back to the Megabass rod. So I throw mainly the P5 110 stick, but these rods right here are probably the most versatile in the jerkbait lineup. So again, if I could only pick 5, I'm probably going to pick one of these over the 110 stick, because there's a lot more I can do with this, and I'll explain here in a second. So this is the jerkbait special from Megabass. Now I have it in an Orochi XX and a Levante here. Orochi is $350 price point. Levante is $250 price point. The difference between these is Levante graphite is a little bit softer and a little bit slower. Orochi graphite is a little bit crisper and a little bit faster, right? So what that means is the tip of the Orochi is just going to be a little quicker. It's going to have a little bit more power to it. The Levante is going to be a little bit softer. It's going to bend a little bit deeper into the blank, right? And it's going to be a little bit softer all the way down through the bottom section. So what that means for you guys, if you're deciding between the two of them, I would go with the one that's going to line up best with the bait size that you throw. So for instance, let's just use the Evoluzion 110 as our baseline here, right? If you are mainly throwing 110s and above, so that would be a 110, a +1, a +2, an Edo Shiner, a Pointer 100, a Varuna, a Rudra, then you want to go with the Orochi. It's going to have a little bit more backbone, a little bit more power, and can handle the little bit bigger jerkbait. But if you're mainly throwing something like a 110, and then when you vary from it, you go down in size, so you go to a Junior +1, an X Nanahan, a Pointer 78, then I would recommend the Levante, because it's going to be a little bit softer and get a little bit better load out of it. Now, the reason I said that this is super versatile, right, as far as just trying to choose 5 rods, jerkbait rods are ultra sensitive rods. This is kind of a sleeper lane for Megabass. So whether you're in Destroyer P5, like I think of all the P5s, Megabass probably going to shoot me for saying this, I think the 110 stick and the upcoming 110 special that's going to drop around the year, I think they're the most sensitive rods in the P5 line. And I feel the same way in Orochi with the jerkbait special. Because most of the time your bites are on slack line, they have built these things super sensitive. Because you're going to be twitch, twitch, pause, and almost always the bite is there when it's on the pause. And it's super important that you feel that little tick when your bait is way out there. So they've made these super sensitive. So even though it says jerkbait on it, you can use this rod for a lot of different techniques. If you need a finesse bottom contact rod, for instance, this can be a great rod to do that. A lot of you guys live in places where you can catch fish on topwater year-round. This is also a great walking bait rod, so you can do that as well. So there you go. My second rod for the winter is a jerkbait rod. All right, Jeff, sadly, my third rod, if I had to choose only 5, is going to be a drop shot rod.
That's so sad.
Yeah. Now, you know, drop shot gets a lot of flack, right? You get so many people that just, I hate drop shot, right? And I think it's because a lot of us use the drop shot as like a crutch, right? When fishing sucks and we have no idea what to do, a lot of us just put on a drop shot and start casting it around, right? And we've done that because it's an amazingly effective way to catch fish, right? It really is. So it's one of the few techniques that allows a bait, like a rubble worm, instead of, this is the bottom, instead of the bait laying on the bottom, it's one of the few techniques that actually works the bait kind of horizontal to the bottom, right? So it allows us to give the fish a different look that's been catching fish for decades. It's never gonna stop. It's just an amazingly effective way to get them. Now, if you don't think catching fish on a drop shot is fun, you can skip this part, or maybe don't use it so much as a crutch. Oh, you're out?
Yeah, I was gonna skip this part.
Oh, like, where's Jeff going? Oh, he's actually skipping. All right. Hey, I'm glad you're finally listening to me, Jeff. You started eating breakfast and drinking beer with me.
Beer, yes. That was a beer I had earlier. Yeah.
Earlier when?
This morning. That was
okay.
That was
you
a beer.
Need to relax. That was literally orange juice.
Yeah, Blue Moon.
Okay. Back to what we were talking about. No matter what you do in the winter, when fishing gets slow and the fish kind of gravitate to the bottom, a drop shot's just an amazing way to get them. If you guys are forward sonar guys, it's going to be something super easy to kind of pan around and be like, oh, there's one on the point, pitch to it. If you guys are, down sonar guys, a lot of times you see them, kind of doing this on the bottom or just laying on the bottom. Really easy to drop down and catch them. If you're just kind of running bank and you have no clue what to do, a drop shot's also a great way to do that as well. So, drop shot rod is what I'm choosing for my number 3 rod. So for me, almost always when I drop shot, this is the rod that I've been using for years. This is the Destroyer Evoluzion Spin Elsiel. Now, I love this rod for nose hook drop shot and very light line Texas rig drop shot, but mostly nose hook drop shot. If you guys are fishing super heavy cover and you have to use a weedless style hook, you might like something a little bit heavier with some more power to it. But for me, this is an amazing one, and what I'm looking for in a drop shot is I want it to have, obviously, enough, a soft enough tip to where I can cast this around on some 6 and 7 pound fluorocarbon, lighter weights, little baits. I throw 1/4 ounce as kind of my mainstay, but I might go down to a 3/16 if I need it to be really light. You could also go up to 3/8 with this rod without it getting too squishy. But you see how fast it is? So it bends a lot. So when I hook a fish, it's gonna fight it and play it, but it's a real fast rod. It's far from a noodle, and that's why I love it. It's ultra sensitive. It sits in my hand really well. It's got this little metal piece to increase sensitivity. So for me, I talk about the Windbuster a lot as my go-to free rig rod. This is like the perfect complement to that rod for me, just because it's just as sensitive and it's perfect. Now, if you didn't want to spend, again, $600 for a drop shot rod, you could always go with a Whipsnake. So they make it in an Orochi, they make it in a Levante. Whipsnake is a very similar taper to the Spin Elsiel. Very similar. It's going to have kind of a soft tip, and it's going to kind of bend through the middle, but it's pretty fast, right? So it's almost identical in action to a Spin Elsiel, just in either an Orochi graphite or Levante graphite. So there you have a 350 option and a 250 option. But whatever you do with a drop shot, especially if it's a nose hook, make sure you're looking for something that's got a soft enough tip. And ideally, what you want is you want to be casting that bait, you want to be moving the bait, and then when a fish bites, you literally just want to kind of wind down and use the reel to set. And you want that rod to be able to load and notch that hook into the top of the fish. And so that's the importance of that taper being soft but still fast, if that makes sense. So, number 3 in the winter, drop shot. All right, rod number 4 for me is definitely a Swimbait rod. Now, a good Swimbait rod is going to allow me to be able to throw a hard bait. I want a rod that can throw like a glide, right? I want a rod that can throw a soft bait. And then I'm also going to use this rod to throw my A-rig. Right, so all 3 of those things are really applicable. When it gets cold, we all want to be swimbait fishermen like Jeff, right? So, winter is just a great time to catch a big fish on a swimbait because, look, they're cold. They don't want to be out there roaming around chasing a bunch of bait. Like, they want to just sit and eat one big meal and be done with it. So they're sucking down big bluegills. They're eating tilapia. A lot of places are getting trout stockings. They're eating the trout. They're eating the big gizzard shads, right? So this is a great time to be throwing some kind of bigger bait. Now, for me, you know, if I'm going in the soft bait realm, I'm throwing something like a Mag Draft or a Citizen, right? So I want the rod to be strong enough to be able to handle like a weedless swim bait like this. But, you know, I love throwing a glide bait. I think glide bait's way more fun. It's like a boxing match almost, right? So, you know, something like a slide swimmer or a jointed claw, those are kind of my go-tos. And of course, we talked about an A-rig as well, right? So this time of the year, usually I go with a little bit bigger baits on my A-rig. So I'm going 4-inch and 5-inch type stuff. So by the time I put 5 baits on it, I'm at, you know, 2, 3, 4 ounces sometimes. So that's going to line up perfect on my swim bait rod. So my all-around swim bait rod choice, I've talked about it a gazillion times, is this guy. This is the Megabass TS Destroyer Blackjack. Okay, I love this rod. I can't say enough good things about this. Jeff, I've been watching you actually using this rod.
Yeah, it's in the Megabass lineup, it is like the staple swim bait rod. It can do a lot, even though it's rated wrong.
Yeah, so
it can do a lot more than what you think.
The rating is terrible. We've talked about this before.
Yeah.
For some reason, this rod is rating 1/2 to 4 ounces. I'm gonna tell you right now, this rod does not cast anything less than 1.5 ounces,
Yeah.
probably, very well. Okay, so don't think that you're gonna throw a 1/2 ounce spinnerbait with this and enjoy it. It sucks. This rod should be 2 to 8 ounces, like all the other swim bait rods. I have no idea why it's rated like this, but it is my go-to for something like a slide swimmer at 6 ounces. It throws it no problem, right? What I love about this rod is that it is strong and it's sensitive and it's fast, but it still bends. So, you know, you hear the word like parabolic thrown around a lot, right? And essentially what we're referring to when we say parabolic is we don't want a broomstick. We don't want like a jig rod like what we looked at with the NRX. We want that rod to be able to bend through the middle section of this rod so that when it's loaded, it's got all this kind of give so that if they're hooked on a treble hook, for instance, that rod's gonna kind of bend and give them a chance to not have it rip out of their face. When you're going to cast, it's loading really nice, so your casting is really fun and you enjoy throwing these things, right? But this rod is kind of a faster parabolic, is what I would call it. So because of that, it lends itself to still having plenty of power to throw something like a Citizen or, you know, something like that on the bottom. Now, just keep in mind that depending on how you're fishing, you may have to adjust your hook set. You may, like usually on a glide bait, there's not a whole lot of hook set. They eat it, you just kind of turn and you got them and you know, it's fucking chaos, right? On a soft bait, you may have to wind down and crack a little bit harder because it is going to have a little bit more give than a rod that's just like dedicated, built for a soft bait. But as far as having one rod to do everything, I can't think of a better rod on the planet than this guy. This is the TS Destroyer Blackjack. But again, if you don't want to go throwing $600 at something, Megabass also makes a Leviathan rod in both Orochi and Levante. Okay, and this has been a rod that's been out in their line for ages. It's got a lot of similar attributes to the TS Destroyer in that it is still relatively parabolic through that midsection. Now, what I would tell you is same thing that I told you in the jerkbait rod. The Orochi is going to be a little bit faster and crisper. The Levante is going to be a little bit slower. So if you find yourself throwing more hard baits in A-rigs, I would pick up the Levante. It's not even a price thing, right? That extra $100 probably isn't going to kill you since you're spending $100 a bait in this realm, right? But I actually prefer the Levante, even though it's cheaper, over the Orochi for just a dedicated hard bait rod. But if you find that you're throwing more soft baits than hard baits, and you're throwing things like this where you need a little bit more oomph, then the Orochi is really special for that. So there you go. There is my number 4 rod. It's a rod I use almost every time out. I mean, a lot of days we'll just go and just throw swim baits. And I feel like Jeff, right? But even when I go normal bass fishing, I almost always have either a glide or an A-rig or something tied up that even if I'm just gonna fling it around 5 or 6 casts and then go back to normal fishing, this is a rod that's a must-have for me. So swim bait rod, number 4. All right, guys, so number 5, since I already had those 4, right? I had to pick a 5th. Number 5, I'm going with what I would consider to be kind of a softer jig rod / junk rod, okay? So what I mean by that is if you start playing in that 7 foot to 7.5, like medium heavy kind of traditional fast action, that rod can do so many different things, right? And honestly, if you're gonna just get one bait casting rod, like if you're new to bait casting and you just wanna get a rod, this is probably the rod you should get because it's gonna have the most versatility of everything we talked about, okay? So for me, that rod is this guy. This is a Megabass Destroyer P5, the Dark Sleeper rod. What it does is it's softer than a traditional jig rod, but it's still a jig rod. So it has a little bit more give, but it's still got lots of power down here in the butt section. This is a rod that I want for throwing things like this. I want to throw a blade bait, right? I want to throw some kind of swim bait, like a little dark sleeper that's kind of like a jig, or maybe I want to throw like a spark shad on a jig head. Maybe the fish are still high in the column and I want to throw like a skinny dipper or some kind of, you know, smaller paddle tail. Maybe they're on the bottom and they're not eating a jig. I need to throw a Texas rig or a free rig or something like that. It handles that. But it's also a great like spinnerbait rod, right? So you can see that's a lot of junk, right? A lot of different things this rod does really, really well. So this is going to kind of just be like my rover of the group. It might be a spinnerbait rod one day. It might be throwing a free rig the next day. It might be throwing a skinny dipper at the next place. But it's just the right type of rod that can do everything pretty well, right? So I think it's a super important rod to have in the lineup. Now, if I'm speccing this out, it's 1/4 to 1 ounce, 8 to 20 pound, 7'1" f4.5. Again, it's just got that perfect kind of bend for doing a little bit of everything towards the bottom, right? When we're talking about bottom contact. Now, again, if you don't want to spend 500 bucks on a P5, another one that I really like, and this rod's been out for ages. I'm waiting desperately for an update to this rod. But even without updates, it's still an amazing rod. It's heavy. It weighs a lot now. But this is the 7.3 medium heavy jig and worm rod by Evergreen. So this is the Evergreen Combat Stick. Now I chose this one because, you know, pretty much every rod line makes a true like medium heavy fast action. And most of the time they're just gonna kind of bend at the tip and then be a jig rod. But every once in a while you find one that actually kind of gives a little bit deeper into the blank, and that's what that Dark Sleeper does so well, and that's what this Evergreen does as well. So it's almost identical to that taper, but in a $199 price point instead of a $500 price point, right? So if you guys need a rod, I know a lot of you fish places where, you know, throwing spoons and blade baits and that kind of stuff is that water cools. This is just a no-brainer rod. Throws paddle tail, spinnerbait, all that kind of stuff. So number 5 for me is, I'm just gonna call it my junk fishing rod, okay? Number 5 for me, junk fishing rod. There you go. All right, guys, so that is a wrap. It was difficult to just choose 5, right? Especially since I love throwing a crankbait and I love throwing top water and all this kind of stuff. But the reality is that I could take those 5 rods and the baits that we talked about and probably go everywhere in the country during the winter and catch fish and have success. So if you guys are just, you know, looking to get started or trying to figure out your arsenal or, you know, how to plan for winter, hopefully that gives you some insight and at least a starting point at some direction. If you have questions on any of the rods we covered, drop it down below. I will definitely get to it. If you have other types of rods that you think I missed that are super staples for you in the winter, please drop it down below in the comments as well, because I want everybody to learn collectively so we can all become better anglers. So on behalf of myself and Jeff and everybody here at the Hookup Tackle Guys, thank you for your time. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your business. And if you have any questions, holler. If not, we'll see you soon. Peace out, my friends. Stay warm.